Greetings. Chapter 3 focuses on research, ethics, and philosophies, looking at the historical background of criminal justice-related ethics and research, the ethical principles, and also research involving special populations such as children and prisoners. Your authors do an excellent job looking at the ethical issues related to Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, as well as Milgram's obedience to authority experiments, also known as the shocking experiments. I think, again, reading about the ethical issues related to those two earlier studies is very relevant. You can go ahead and you can Google these studies, and you can actually see film of these studies. Very, very fascinating. There's been movies made of these also. Very fascinating stuff. And of course, it's important to remember the time period when these studies were conducted. Again, your authors look at the historical background and the development of ethical practices in research, and also the importance of the IRB, or the Institutional Review Boards, which are basically committees at universities or hospitals or other facilities that review research proposals to make sure that the research is ethical, and to make sure that some potential problems are identified and resolved before the study is carried out. And so, for example, at universities, whenever we're doing research involving people or animals, we must go through the Institutional Review Board, who carefully reviews our research proposal and then approves it or asks us to make changes. Sometimes we're able to get a letter stating that that it's been briefly reviewed, and because it doesn't involve people or animals, for example, we're analyzing a secondary data. We're using a data set that's been already collected and is out there in the public domain, Uniform Crime Reports data, for example, and then we can get a letter stating that we can proceed with our research without really going through the formal process. But the IRB is there to protect the participants, and also to protect the university, the researchers, and the integrity of the research process. Some of the ethical principles discussed are achieving valid results and being honest and open and transparent about how we conduct the research and our results, also protecting research participants and how we actually use our research. That we may conduct a study, for example, and get paid to do that as a consultant, and then we also sign a letter stating that we will keep all information confidential about the study, and we conduct a study. When we find some interesting things, we deliver the report to the agency. Well, that's it, right? That it's their report, it's their data, and we can't say anything more without their permission. So, we have to look at how these agreements take place, and where there's exceptions. For example, if one's conducting a study on parenting and crime, and they find cases of child abuse and neglect, those by law need to be reported. So we also want to look at the how laws are related to the ethics as well. And you can read through a lot of their examples. Again, some of the real important aspects is presenting, the research, the important parts of our research, whether we find what we were hoping to find or not. One of the problems called the trash can problem, or something of that sort, someone conducts a study saying my program that I'm evaluating reduces crime. They find out not only does it not reduce criminal behavior, it seems to increase. That would be extremely important information to publish, that your program is bad. that would be ethical. To publish that, to let others know, to let others look at it, to replicate it, to see what's going on, or to change it. And a lot of times, boom, just throw the study away. They don't want to publish that. That's real important. It's also important to look at, how the studies relate to programming and policies. Certainly I have a big problem with programs that are still running it's been shown in the research over and over again that the programs don't work, or they even have a backfire effect, or they have negative effects. So a lot of that gets tied up in the ethics, and we always have to be aware and careful of the politics that can come in there as well. Protecting research participants is extremely important. So we want to avoid any harm, and we want to look at some possibilities of issues that can come up. Sometimes if we're dealing with sensitive material, we might also have, referrals to a counseling center if they become upset or distressed, not necessarily from the research, but aspects related to the research maybe, or they think about a situation that occurred a while back. We also want to be sure we obtain informed consent. So it's voluntary, and the person can pull out of the study at any time. There's specific rules and regulations for doing research with vulnerable populations, prisoners, people with mental disorders, children, for example. So that's real important. Also, there's some discussion about deception and debriefing, and how that works, and of course that's related to different types of research. Obviously, we don't want to bias our research in advance, saying this is what we're doing because we'd like to study this to find that. So we can leave out information. Deception, we have to again consider the benefits and the disadvantages, and some of the possibilities of what could happen. Maintaining privacy and confidentiality is extremely important. We have to be careful. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I participated in a study with my treatment team regarding stress, how child abuse caseworkers and therapists, dealt with the stress generated from their work. And so I participated in the study, and so did my two colleagues. And we sent those surveys back to this university out west. I won't mention the name. And we were guaranteed that the data would remain confidential. They were not going to disclose our names. Well, about 6 months later, our administrator sends me an initial report from this organization, this university, and what it was basically the results of the study, and it said that they broke down their results for each particular organization. We had 3 people working in the organization. They broke it down by gender. I was the only male. So basically they gave my confidential results to my boss. Thankfully, I rated her very highly and supportive, and I had positive stress reduction techniques. But can you imagine if I was negative about my boss, and can you imagine if I said that it was so stressful that I used alcohol or drugs or something like that? And that is a good example, I think. I was a little bit perturbed, and I believe I wrote a letter. That was a long, long time ago, back in the 80s, so we didn't have the internet and email. So I wrote a letter saying, you violated the confidentiality of this research. I was already interested in conducting research, and you should be aware that it's not a good idea to send, the data separated out by very small, organizational people. And I think it was a honest mistake, but they just didn't think it through, and they never got back with me. I thought they'd send me a hat and t-shirt. But we always want to be careful of that. The American Society of Criminology has Code of Ethics, and you can get that online at their site. Actually, I have Massachusetts. They publish it several times. Real important to review. I'm in a very unique situation. Not very unique, but in addition to being a criminologist and sociologist, I'm also a licensed mental health counselor and a board certified counselor and a forensic counselor with different organizations, agencies. And so I actually have about 7 or 8 codes of ethics, and I have to follow all those. But what I find is I go look at the one that is the strictest and follow that, and that really is the clinical counseling one, and that seems to have the similar or even more than some of the basic research that social scientists would do. And so I try to follow. So I do follow those. Another area that I wanted to mention is the internet and online research. This is an excellent book, Netnography. I got the second edition here by Robert Kozinets, and talks a lot about doing online research. There's a whole chapter on ethics. One of the things, I just mentioned a few things that this professor mentions that, for example, if we're doing research, online research on any particular group or organization and or using social media, we might want to take a look at their terms of service and see, that we're agreeing to that. But if you've ever read terms of service, it's sometimes boggle the mind how long and drawn out they can be. But also, we want to know, are we agreeing if we use that? A lot of times we'll click, I agree to those terms. Whenever I get a Kindle book or a Apple iPad book, it says, you agree to the terms of service regarding the book. And, I click, of course I do. But I've never read those pages and pages of terms of service. So we want to, take a look at that to make sure we're not violating the terms of service, and that we also may need to contact the organization and ask for permission to do particular research. Kozinets states, don't deceive if you're interacting online. That's going to lead to problems in a variety of ways with institutional review boards, with the groups, with conducting research. And informed consent, also, we have to consider, who do we get informed consent from and how. These, again, are going to be specific to the type of study that you do. And also, what is considered public versus private space. And also looking at age and vulnerability. If you're studying, recovering heroin addicts and a listserv or a support group or something, you got to look at the ethical aspects of informed consent, deception, protection of subjects, and the like. And also you can cross international boundaries much easier. So how do you deal with that scenario? Let me give you one more example real quick, and that is that a editor of an online newspaper was presenting election or a candidate information and opinions on an online newspaper that she ran. And in this community, a pollster was calling and asking all these questions about, demographic backgrounds and then who they were going to support and so on and so forth. I was shocked that that group went ahead and called up the editor of that or the writer owner of that online newspaper, said they were conducting a political survey, asked her a whole bunch of questions about her political beliefs and support of certain candidates, and then published it to point out that the paper was allegedly biased. What got me is that, the telephone rings, and, you're, oh, okay, yeah, I'd be glad to answer some questions. Oh, yes, no, and so on and so forth. You don't know who you're talking to. I wondered, was this unethical And so I talked to some colleagues about it, and they said no, because there was no mention of remaining anonymous or the information being confidential, that there's no expectation I should have of that. But one of the things that does, which I think what gets me is, first of all, I thought it was a little bit deceptive. I thought it was deceptive, to call themselves doing a political poll, but really wanted to find out, their view so they could find out whether they're biased or not. I mean, why not just call and say, hey, I think you're biased. Let's talk. Buy them a cup of coffee, talk. So the other day, right now, a lot of political calls are coming in. The ones that come in between 5:30 and 8, right when I'm either eating or trying to sleep. So I turn off the ringers on the phones. In fact, my wife says, why do we even have a landline anymore? But the other evening I picked up the phone, hello, and someone said, well, I'd like to do a survey. I said, I'm not comfortable with giving a complete stranger any information anymore. And she said, well, I can guarantee you that your results will be confidential. And I said, okay, well, who are you and where are you from again? Oh, a survey agency. Well, what's the name of it? Well, we're just conducting surveys. And then I explained that I wasn't comfortable and hung up. Stuff like that. And same thing with online research and a lot of other features. That there's a lot of issues related to what we can get offline and study, and on how careful we have to be. And just because it's out there, it's not necessarily ethical to carry out research in a particular way. So lots of examples to think about, and I think it's become a lot more complex now with the online availability of data collection and research. Thank you.